Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had a Sukuna and Gojo powers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world did not begin with a scream for Izuku Midoriya. It began with an overload. Most children remember the warmth of their mother's arms or the taste of their favorite sweet as their earliest memory. Izuku remembered the atoms. He remembered the terrifying, crushing weight of information. He remembered seeing the air not as empty space, but as a swirling, chaotic ocean of particulate matter, energy vectors, and vibrant, blinding colors that had no names. He was 4 years old, sitting on the crinkling paper of an examination table in Unauthorized General Hospital. The fluorescent lights above hummed, but to Izuku they didn't just hum, they screamed. He could see the electricity coursing through the filaments, the decay of the tungsten, the photons bombarding the room like hail. He clamped his small hands over his eyes, sobbing, his fingernails digging into his skin. But it didn't help. He could see through his eyelids. He could see the skeletal structure of the doctor standing 3 feet away. He could see the flow of blood rushing through his mother's terrified heart. "Make it stop," Izuku whimpered, his voice cracking. "Mommy, please turn off the world. It's too bright." Inko Midoriya hovered nervously, her hands fluttering around her son but afraid to touch him, lest she trigger another episode of hysterical screaming. She looked at the doctor, a specialist named Dr. Tsubasa, with desperate, tear-filled eyes. "Doctor, please," she begged. "He's been like this for weeks. He throws up if he opens his eyes. He says he sees everything." Dr. Tsubasa, a round man with thick goggles, was not looking at Inko. He was staring at the wall of monitors displaying Izuku's brain activity and genetic mapping. The man's face was pale, glistening with a cold sweat. He had seen many quirks manifest, some beautiful, some grotesque, but he had never seen data like this. "Mrs. Midoriya," the doctor said, his voice unusually grave. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Izuku is not quirkless. Far from it." He tapped a screen, enlarging an image of Izuku's brain. The human brain processes visual information at a specific rate. We ignore 99% of what our eyes take in so we can function. Izuku's brain is processing everything. Tsubasa swallowed hard. He sees the infrared, the ultraviolet. He perceives the flow of energy, the density of matter, the distortion of space. He sees the world in high-definition atomic detail, constantly, without a filter. Inko gasped, covering her mouth. Is that his quirk?" "It is a mutation of the eyes," Tsubasa corrected, taking a step closer to the boy, fascinated yet fearful. "We call it the Rikugen, the 6 eyes. It is a genetic anomaly that shouldn't be biologically possible. It grants him perception that rivals the gods. But Mrs. Midoriya, that is not the only thing." The doctor changed the slide to an X-ray of Izuku's chest cavity. There was a shadow there, a strange, vestigial formation wrapped around the boy's heart and lungs, pulsing with a dark, necrotic energy that didn't show up on standard thermal scans. "Izuku had a twin in the womb," Tsubasa said softly. "Vanishing twin syndrome is common. Usually, the tissue is absorbed. But Izuku's body didn't just absorb the tissue, it absorbed the quirk factor of the twin." Inko trembled. I don't understand." "The twin," Tsubasa whispered, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "The genetic markers suggest a mutation of pure malevolence. A parasitic, dormant consciousness, a king of curses, if you were to be poetic. Izuku is acting as a vessel for a power that is ancient and violent. His body is constantly generating a negative form of energy, cursed energy, to keep this parasite contained." Izuku whimpered on the table, curling into a ball. "Hungry," a voice whispered in the back of his mind. It wasn't his voice. It sounded like grinding stones and dripping blood. "Let me eat." "The 6 eyes are the only reason he isn't brain dead," Tsubasa concluded grimly. "They allow him to manipulate this cursed energy with atomic precision to reinforce his body and mind. But the strain is killing him. If he continues to perceive the world raw, his brain will fry within a year." The doctor turned to a cabinet and pulled out a long strip of black cloth. It was made of a heavy, light-absorbent weave. He must wear this, Tsubasa commanded, handing the blindfold to Inko. At all times. It will dampen the visual input to a manageable level. He will still be able to see. His perception transcends standard vision, but it will stop the headaches. Inko took the cloth with trembling hands. She turned to her son, her heart breaking at his pained expression. Gently, she wrapped the black fabric around his eyes, tying it securely at the back of his head with a tuft of his green curls sticking out. "Is that better, Izuku?" she whispered. Izuku blinked behind the fabric. The blinding white noise of the universe dimmed. The atomic storm settled into a manageable stream of data. He could still see the doctor, still see the wall, still see the dust motes dancing in the air. But the burning pain behind his eyes faded to a dull throb. "It's quiet," Izuku whispered, but as the physical noise faded, the internal noise grew louder. "Good," the voice in his head laughed, a low rumble that vibrated in his very marrow. "Now that you aren't distracted by the light, we can talk, brat." Izuku froze. "Mrs. Midoriya," Dr. Tsubasa said, marking the file with a red stamp labeled high risk. "Your son's power is infinite. But you must teach him never to let it loose. If he loses control, he won't just break a bone. He will break the world." 10 years later, Aldera Junior High was a cesspool of mediocrity, and Izuku Midoriya walked through its halls like a ghost. At 14, Izuku was a striking, unsettling figure. He wore the standard black school uniform, buttoned to the collar, but his face was dominated by the white bandage-like blindfold wrapped around his eyes. He had upgraded from the black cloth of his childhood to specialized medical bandages that allowed for better breathability, though they effectively marked him as the school's resident freak. He didn't walk with the slouch of a victim, nor the strut of a bully. He floated, not literally, though he could if he wanted to, but his movements were fluid, frictionless. He moved through the crowded hallways without ever brushing shoulders with another student. It was as if there was an invisible barrier between him and the rest of reality. "Out of the way, Deku," a rough voice barked. "Katsuki Bakugo." Izuku paused, tilting his head slightly. Through the blindfold, the 6 eyes painted the world in high contrast tomography and energy flow. He saw Bakugo not as a boy, but as a walking reactor of nitroglycerin and aggression. The energy pooled in Bakugo's palms, sparking orange and red in the spectrum of Izuku's vision. "Good morning, Katsuki," Izuku said. His voice was soft, detached. It lacked the stuttering fear he used to have when they were 5. Now, it held a strange, airy quality, like he was speaking from a great distance. Bakugo gritted his teeth, smoke curling from his palms. He hated the blindfold. He hated that he couldn't see the nerd's eyes. He hated the rumor that Izuku wasn't quirkless, just broken. "Don't look down on me with that face wrapper, you damn extra," Bakugo snarled, shoving a hand toward Izuku's shoulder. Pop! Bakugo's hand stopped. It didn't hit Izuku. It didn't hit a wall. It just stopped. 2 inches from the fabric of Izuku's uniform, Bakugo's fingers pressed against nothingness. The blonde strained, his veins bulging, pushing with all his might, but the distance between his hand and Izuku remained absolute. "Infinity," Izuku murmured, almost to himself. "The convergence of an infinite series prevents contact. You know the math, Katsuki. Don't give me your physics crap." Bakugo yelled, snatching his hand back as if burned. He was the only one in the school brave enough, or stupid enough, to try and touch Midoriya. Everyone else stayed 3 feet away, unsettled by the cold air that seemed to radiate from the boy. "We're going to be late," Izuku said simply, stepping around Bakugo. He didn't flinch. He didn't cower. That was what infuriated Bakugo the most. Deku didn't fear him. Deku looked at him like he was a mildly interesting insect. As Izuku walked away, the voice in his head yawned. "He's loud," Sukuna grumbled, his consciousness stretching like a cat inside Izuku's soul. "Let me cut his tongue out. It would be quiet then. No killing," Izuku thought back firmly, adjusting his backpack. "We have a deal, Sukuna." "A binding vow," the curse corrected sneeringly. "I lend you my reserve so your brain doesn't nub from the eyes, and you keep me entertained. This," the presence gestured vaguely at the drab school hallway, "is not entertaining. I hunger for flesh, boy. Not algebra." "Sleep," Izuku commanded, forcing his will against the entity. It was a constant war. For 10 years, Izuku had been the jailer of the King of Curses. He had studied jujutsu sorcery from dusty old texts Dr. Tsubasa had found, learned about cursed energy, and trained his mind to maintain the barrier of limitless. He wasn't a hero. He was a nuclear containment unit shaped like a teenage boy. Class was boring. It was agonizingly slow. The teacher was droning on about career aptitude tests. Izuku sat in the back, his head tilted toward the window. He could count the number of leaves on the tree outside, 4,302. He could hear the conversation of a couple 2 streets away. He could feel the atmospheric pressure dropping, signaling rain later that evening. Midoriya, the teacher called out, holding a sheet of paper. You're aiming for Uehai, aren't you? The room went silent. Usually, this was the part where the class would laugh, where they would jeer at the quirkless boy dreaming big. But nobody laughed. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Yes, Izuku said. He didn't stand up. He just sat there, the blindfold facing the front of the room. Yue. The hero course, the teacher stammered slightly. With your condition? Is there a rule against blindfolds? Izuku asked. Well, no, but DKU. Bakugo slammed his hands on his desk, an explosion rattling the wood. You think you can stand in the same ring as me? You think your creepy magic trick puts you on my level? Izuku turned his head slowly toward Bakugo. I'm not trying to compete with you, Katsuki, Izuku said, his voice flat. I'm just going where I'm needed. Needed? Sukuna cackled in his mind. You're going because you want to find something strong enough to kill you, aren't you? Or maybe you want to see if you can kill it first. Izuku ignored the voice. He ignored the glares. He just waited for the bell to ring, signaling the end of another day of purgatory. The walk home was usually the only time Izuku felt at peace. He took the long route, avoiding the main streets. He liked the underpasses. The shadows felt like home, closer to the dark energy that churned inside his gut. He was passing under the Tatooine tunnel when the drain cover rattled. Izuku stopped. His 6 eyes flared behind the bandages. He saw the shift in density. Fluid. Viscous. A biological mass hiding in the sewer system. Predator, Sukuna whispered, sounding interested for the first time all day. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. A gurgling voice echoed from the grate. The sludge erupted. A villain made of muck and sewage shot out, towering over the boy. You'll make a perfect skin suit to hide in, kid! The villain lunged. Izuku didn't move. He didn't run. He stood with his hands in his pockets. The sludge slammed down on him, or tried to. Squelch. The liquid mass hit the invisible barrier of the limitless. It spread out around Izuku like a dome, unable to penetrate the space between the atoms of the air and Izuku's skin. Izuku stood in the eye of the storm, dry and untouched, while the villain groaned in confusion. What? What is this? The villain panicked, trying to force his liquid body closer. Why can't I grab you? Zeno's paradox, Izuku explained, as if giving a lecture. The closer you get, the slower you go. An infinite amount of finite space exists between you and me. You will never touch me. Die. The villain lashed out with a tendril of sludge, aiming for Izuku's mouth to suffocate him. Izuku sighed. He raised 2 fingers. Cursed energy output, low. Technique lapse, blue. A tiny sphere of negative energy manifested at the tip of Izuku's finger. It was a vacuum in reality, a hole in the fabric of space that the universe desperately wanted to fill. Izuku flicked his finger. The tiny blue orb shot forward. When it hit the center of the villain's chest, it didn't explode, it imploded. The air screamed as it was sucked in. The sludge villain's body was violently warped, twisted, and pulled toward the center of the anomaly. Gah! The villain shrieked as his liquid form was scattered and spun like laundry in a washing machine. Texas smash! A booming voice shattered the moment. All Might, the symbol of peace, burst out of the manhole cover. His punch created wind pressure so intense it blew the sludge villain apart, and would have blown Izuku away too, had he not anchored himself with cursed energy. The villain was reduced to splatter on the tunnel walls. All Might stood tall, steam rising from his massive form. He blinked, looking around. He expected to find a terrified civilian. Instead, he saw a slender boy with a blindfold, standing amidst the carnage, dusting off his uniform. I am her. Oh, All Might paused. Are you alright, young man? Izuku looked up at the towering hero. The six eyes analyzed him instantly. Massive energy reserves, Izuku noted. But failing. The fire is dying. His respiratory system is half destroyed. He's a walking corpse holding onto a ghost. I'm fine, Izuku said. That was dangerous. All Might laughed, though he was eyeing the strange boy curiously. But fear not. I have captured the wait, where is he? All Might looked around. The villain was scattered, incapacitated not by the punch, but by the vortex Izuku had created seconds prior. He's unstable. Izuku pointed to a pile of quivering muck. You should bottle him up before he reforms. All Might hastily gathered the sludge into empty soda bottles. Right. Good eye, young man. Though, you can't see? He gestured to the blindfold. I see enough, Izuku said. He turned to leave. You should get that injury checked, All Might. You're leaking. All Might froze. Leaking? Your energy, Izuku said over his shoulder. It's spilling out of your side. You're running on fumes. Before All Might could ask how the hell the boy knew that, Izuku had vanished around the corner, moving with that uncanny, sliding gait. Izuku sat on a park bench, his notebook open. He wasn't drawing All Might. He was drawing the flow of energy he had seen in the tunnel. He's dying, Sukuna mocked. The pillar of this society is crumbling. When he falls, the rats will come out to play. Everyone dies eventually, Izuku thought. Not me, Sukuna retorted. And not you, if you let me take the wheel. Shut up. A booming explosion shook the ground. Izuku looked up. Black smoke was rising from the shopping district a few blocks away. The air tasted of ash and sugar, nitroglycerin. Katsuki? Izuku packed his notebook slowly. He shouldn't go. Heroes would handle it. He was just a student. A vessel. Go, Sukuna whispered. I smell fear. Delicious, potent fear. Against his better judgment, Izuku walked toward the smoke. When he arrived, it was chaos. The sludge villain had escaped All Might's bottles. It had found a new hostage. Bakugo. The scene was a nightmare. Flames roared around the alleyway. The pros, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, were useless. They were held back by the fire or the lack of space. And in the center of the inferno, the sludge villain was suffocating Bakugo, trying to take over his body. Stay back! The villain roared, using Bakugo's explosions to keep the heroes at bay. Izuku stood at the back of the crowd. The heat washed over him, but his infinity kept the temperature around his body at a cool 20 degrees Celsius. He watched with detached horror. Bakugo was thrashing. His eyes, usually so full of arrogance, were wide with terror. He was dying. Look at him, Sukuna purred. The loud mouth. Dying like a dog. Why aren't they moving? Izuku muttered. The heroes, why are they just watching? There's no one with the right quirk. A bystander yelled. They're waiting for All Might, but All Might wasn't coming. Izuku had seen his limit. The hero was likely depowered somewhere, watching this just like Izuku was. Bakugo's eyes locked onto the crowd. He found the blindfold. For a second, the screaming stopped. Bakugo looked directly at Izuku. It wasn't a glare. It was a plea. Help me. Izuku's body moved before his mind gave permission. Hey! Stop, kid! Death Arms shouted. Izuku ducked under the police tape. He didn't run with the frantic desperation of a normal person. He moved with terrifying speed, cursed energy reinforcing his legs. 1 step, and he was 10 meters forward. 2 steps, and he was inside the ring of fire. The heat was intense, melting the asphalt, but the fire parted around Izuku, rebuffed by the invisible barrier. You! The sludge villain shrieked. The brat from the tunnel. The villain swung a massive tendril of muck mixed with explosions at Izuku. Izuku didn't dodge. He raised his hand. Slam! The attack hit the barrier and stopped dead. The shockwave rattled the windows, but Izuku stood firm, his hair blowing in the wind. Let him go, Izuku said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried over the roar of the fire. Die! The villain tried to engulf him. Inside Izuku, the seal weakened. The adrenaline, the anger at the hero's inaction, the proximity to death. It was a feast for Sukuna. Let me, Sukuna whispered. Let me teach him what real power is. No, Izuku gritted his teeth. I'll do it. Izuku stepped forward. He reached out toward the sludge covering Bakugo's face. Get off him! Izuku grabbed the sludge. Usually you couldn't grab liquid. But Izuku infused his fingers with cursed energy, reinforcing his grip until the sludge felt like solid clay. He ripped a chunk of the villain away, freeing Bakugo's mouth. Deku? Bakugo gasped, coughing smoke. What the hell are you? Shut up, Izuku snapped. He looked at the villain. The villain laughed. You can't hurt me. I'm fluid. I have no solid form. Izuku's blindfold shifted as he scowled. Everything has a form, Izuku said cold, echoing a lesson from the ancient texts. Even space. He brought his hands together. The air around them began to scream. It was a high-pitched whine, like a jet engine starting up. The debris on the ground began to float. Bakugo watched, wide-eyed, as the space around Izuku distorted. The colors inverted. Blue became orange, red became green. Curse technique lapse. Izuku chanted. The pressure dropped so suddenly that everyone's ears popped. The heroes froze. The villain paused, sensing a predator far greater than himself. Maximum output blue. Izuku pulled his hands apart. A sphere of absolute attraction formed between the villain and Bakugo. It wasn't just suction, it was a deletion of coordinates. The universe shrieked as it tried to fill the void Izuku had created. The sludge villain was ripped off Bakugo instantly. He didn't just fly off, he was stretched. His liquid body was pulled into a thin, screaming thread of matter, spiraling into the blue singularity. No! No! Stop! The villain wailed. The fire in the alley was sucked in too. The debris. The smoke. Everything collapsed into the point in front of Izuku. Izuku stood in the center of the destruction, his hand outstretched, controlling the singularity. He looked like a god of destruction. The sheer violence of the technique was terrifying. Disappear, Izuku whispered. He clenched his fist. Crunch. The singularity imploded. The shockwave blasted outward, shattering every window in the block. The sludge villain was scattered into microscopic droplets, plastered against the walls of the alleyway in a fine mist. The fire was extinguished instantly by the vacuum. Silence fell over the street. In the center of the cratered road, Izuku stood panting. His hands were shaking. Smoke rose from his fingertips, not from fire, but from the friction of cursed energy burning the air. Bakugo sat on the ground, staring up at him. He was trembling. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo looked small. What? Bakugo whispered. What was that? Izuku touched his blindfold, ensuring it was still in place. The headache was returning. A massive migraine that felt like a spike being driven into his skull. He had used too much energy. Sorcery, Izuku muttered. The heroes rushed in then, shaking off their shock. That was reckless! Kamui shouted, though he kept his distance. You could have killed the hostage. What kind of quirk is that? You're a student, aren't you? Death Arms yelled. That was vigilantism. Izuku ignored them. He felt the bile rising in his throat. The use of blue at that scale had nauseated him. Young man! The crowd parted. All Might, in his buff form, though steaming slightly, walked through. He looked at the devastation. He looked at the scattered remains of the villain. Then he looked at Izuku. Izuku braced himself for a lecture. All Might started. He looked down at his own hands. I am pathetic, the heroes gasped. All Might? I waited, All Might said, his voice thick with emotion. I waited because I was afraid of my limit. But you. He pointed a massive finger at Izuku. You, with fear in your heart, jumped in when the pros stood by. You saved him. Izuku blinked behind the bandage. However, All Might's tone hardened. That power, it is not a hero's power. It is a weapon of mass destruction. Izuku flinched. If you cannot control the blast radius, All Might said softly, leaning down so only Izuku could hear, you are not saving people. You are just changing the method of their death. Izuku looked at the crater he had made. He looked at the terrified faces of the civilians. They weren't cheering for him. They were staring at him like he was a monster. Like he was the villain. See? Sukuna whispered. They fear the strong. They don't want a hero brat. They want a pet. And you are a wolf. Izuku turned to All Might. I didn't ask to be a hero, Izuku said, his voice trembling. I just wanted him to stop screaming. Later that evening, Izuku walked home alone. The adrenaline had faded, leaving him exhausted. His bones ached. The cursed energy had taken its toll. I am here! All Might slid out from an alleyway in a flash of speed, blocking Izuku's path. Then, in a puff of smoke, he deflated into his skeletal, true form. Blood coughed from his mouth. Izuku didn't look surprised. You lost your form. You really can see everything, All Might sighed, wiping his mouth. Young man. I came to apologize. And to ask. Ask what? Who are you? All Might looked at him with intense, sunken eyes. That power, the space distortion. And the aura I felt, it wasn't just your quirk, was it? There was something else. Something evil. Izuku stiffened. He gripped the strap of his backpack. It's a curse, Izuku said quietly. I'm cursed. Tell me, All Might said, and for some reason, Izuku did. Standing under the flickering street lamp, he told the number one hero about the 6 eyes. About the sensory overload. About the parasitic twin, Ryaman Sukuna, the king of curses, living in his soul. About how he had to constantly burn energy just to keep the monster asleep. All Might listened in silence. When Izuku finished, the skeletal man looked deeply sad. I was going to look for a successor, All Might admitted. Someone to inherit my power, one for all. I thought, when I saw you run in, maybe you were the one. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. Inherit All Might's power? But I cannot give it to you, All Might said firmly. Izuku's shoulders slumped. Because I'm a monster. No, All Might shook his head. Because you are already full. Your cup is overflowing, young Midoriya. If I gave you my power, your body would explode. You are holding back a demon. Adding my power would break the seal. Oh, Izuku whispered. Right. But All Might stepped closer. He placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. It was the first time someone had touched him in years without being stopped by the infinity. Izuku had lowered the barrier unconsciously. You need a teacher, All Might said. You have the power of a god and the burden of a devil. If you walk this path alone, you will lose your way. You will become the calamity you fear. Izuku looked up. I cannot give you my quirk, All Might smiled, a genuine, crooked smile. But I can give you my time. I can teach you what it means to be a hero. I can help you build a vessel strong enough to keep that king in check. Tears pricked Izuku's eyes beneath the blindfold. You're not scared of me? I am terrified of you. All Might laughed, coughing up a little blood. But I am more terrified of a world where a boy like you has no one to guide him. High is the place for you, young Midoriya, but we have a lot of work to do before the entrance exam. All Might pointed a finger at him. You want to save people? Then you must master your own selfishness. You must become the strongest, not for the sake of power, but for the sake of peace. Can you do that? Izuku wiped his face. Inside him, Sukuna scoffed, but remained silent. The king was waiting. Watching. Izuku clenched his fist. The blue energy flickered around his fingers, controlled, steady. I'll try, Izuku said. Wrong answer. All Might grinned. I will, Izuku corrected himself. He adjusted his blindfold, a small smile appearing on his face. I will be the strongest. All Might nodded. Then let's begin. Welcome to your Hero Academia, Izuku Midoriya. The smell of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was a unique cocktail of rotting algae, rusted metal, and the salty decay of the Pacific. To the average person, it was merely unpleasant. To Izuku Midoriya, it was a cacophony of molecular decomposition that assaulted his senses with the force of a physical blow. He stood on the edge of the seawall, the early morning sun reflecting off the water. He was wearing a tracksuit that hung loosely on his frame, his eyes wrapped in the stark white medical bandages he had adopted since meeting All Might 2 weeks ago. In his hand, he held a stick of dango, sweet rice dumplings. He took a bite, chewing slowly. The sugar hit his bloodstream almost instantly, a necessary fuel for the supercomputer that was his brain. Young Midoriya, A cloud of sand erupted as All Might, in his muscular form, landed beside him. The hero struck a pose, gleaming teeth flashing even in the dreary surroundings of the garbage heaps. Good morning! Are you ready to move some trash? To build the vessel of a hero? Izuku finished the dango and tossed the stick into a nearby bin using a tiny flick of attractive force. Good morning, All Might. And no. All Might blinked, deflating slightly. No, I don't need to move the trash, Izuku said, turning his bandaged face toward the piles of refrigerators and tires. I need to learn how not to crush it into a singularity by accident. He held up his hand. His fingers twitched. The air around a washing machine 10 meters away began to warp. The metal groaned, screeching as invisible forces torqued the steel frame. My problem isn't strength, Izuku explained, his voice flat. It's bandwidth. The 6 eyes give me too much information. My brain is constantly running cooling calculations to keep infinity active. If I try to exert force, like a punch, without proper control, I lose the barrier. Or worse, I let him slip through. He tapped his chest. All Might's smile dropped, replaced by a somber look. He remembered the conversation about the entity, Ryam and Sukuna. So All Might said, his voice softer, deflating into his skeletal form to conserve energy. We are not building muscles. We are building a dam. Exactly, Izuku said. He sat down on the sand in a lotus position, facing the ocean. I need to meditate. I need to sort the inputs. I need to automate the process of limitless so I don't have to think about it. Until I can do that, I can't fight without risking collateral damage. All Might scratched his head. Well, that's not exactly the American dream plan I had in mind, but very well. I shall act as your guard. Meditate, young Midoriya. Master the void. Izuku took a deep breath. He focused on the darkness behind the blindfold. Here we go, he thought. Into the belly of the beast, the innate domain, the world of the waking mind faded. The sound of the waves and the smell of rot vanished, replaced by the scent of iron and stagnant water. Izuku opened his eyes. He wasn't on the beach anymore. He was standing in ankle-deep water that was warm and thick, blood. The sky above was a ribcage of massive, dark bones that curved inward, creating a claustrophobic dome. The air was heavy with malice. In front of him rose a mountain of skulls. Human skulls, animal skulls, skulls of things that defied classification. And sitting atop this throne of death, lounging in a white kimono with a dark sash, was the king. Ryam and Sukuna looked exactly like Izuku, but wrong. His hair was slicked back, his face covered in black tattoos of geometric lines and eyes. He had a second pair of small, closed eyes beneath his main ones. He radiated a pressure that would have crushed a normal human soul instantly. So, Sukuna drawled, resting his chin on his fist. His voice was a deep, resonating baritone that vibrated in Izuku's chest. The brat returns. Come to beg for mercy? Izuku stood firm in the blood. He didn't look afraid. He looked tired. I'm not here to beg, Izuku said. I'm here to make a deal. Sukuna's eyes widened slightly, and a grin split his face, a predatory, toothy expression. A deal? A binding vow? Interesting. You usually just scream at me to shut up. I can't keep this up, Izuku admitted. He looked at his hands. In this mental space, he didn't wear the blindfold. His eyes were a brilliant, glowing azure, burning with the light of the 6 eyes. My brain is frying. The energy cost to maintain the limitless barrier and filter the sensory input is too high. I'm dying, Sukuna. And if I die, you die. I won't die, Sukuna scoffed. I'll just be fragmented again. Annoying, but temporary. It could take centuries for you to reincarnate, Izuku countered. Or, we can help each other. Sukuna leaned forward, the bones beneath him crunching. Speak. I need access to your cursed energy reserves, Izuku said clearly. Not to fight. To fuel the 6 eyes. I need your energy to run my brain's refreshing process. To use reverse cursed technique on my own neurons constantly so they don't burn out. If I tap into your reservoir, I can keep infinity active 24/7. I can master this power, Sukuna hummed, tapping a clawed finger against his cheek. You want to sip from my well to keep your little head from popping. A fair request. But what do I get? I'm not a charity brat. You want to feel the world, don't you? Izuku asked. You hate being locked in here. I hate boredom, Sukuna corrected. When I fight. Izuku hesitated. This was the dangerous part. When I fight seriously, I have to suppress my humanity. Empathy makes me hesitate. Hesitation disrupts the flow of cursed energy. So, when I enter combat, I will lower the mental wall. I will let your instincts bleed through. Sukuna's grin widened until it looked painful. Oh? You'll let me drive? No, Izuku said sharply. I stay in the driver's seat. But I will let you navigate. I will let your aggression influence my actions. You get to taste the violence. You get to feel the thrill of the kill through my body. But I make the final decision. Sukuna laughed. It was a barking, cruel sound that echoed in the ribcage sky. You think you can handle my influence without losing yourself, boy? Sukuna mocked. You're a soft-hearted child who cries over spilled milk. Try me, Izuku said cold. I'm already half monster because of you. I might as well use it. Sukuna stared at him for a long moment. He saw the shift in Izuku's soul. The desperation had hardened into something brittle and sharp. Fine, Sukuna said. A binding vow. You take my energy to keep your brain fresh. In exchange, when you engage in violence, you drop your moral suppressors. You let me enjoy the show. Agreed, Izuku said. Chains of black smoke materialized from the air, wrapping around Izuku's wrist and Sukuna's claw. They tightened, burning into the skin, marking the pact. Don't regret it, brat, Sukuna whispered, fading back into the darkness. The line between you and me is going to get very blurry. 4 months later. Duck. Izuku tilted his head to the left. A refrigerator flew past his ear, missing him by millimeters. Very good. All Might shouted, holding a rusted car chassis. But you're still relying on sight. Feel the air displacement. Izuku stood amidst the trash piles. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't panting. He was breathing in a rhythmic, controlled pattern. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Since the binding vow, things had changed. The constant headache was gone. The white noise in his brain had settled into a hum. He was constantly channeling Sukuna's vast, dark ocean of energy, filtering it through his own soul, and using it to run reverse curse technique on his own brain cells. He was essentially refreshing his mind thousands of times a second. He never slept, not really. His brain didn't need to shut down anymore. All Might, Izuku said, raising a hand. Throw the car. Are you sure? All Might hesitated. This is a 1998 sedan. It's heavy. Throw it. All Might shrugged and hurled the vehicle. It spun through the air, a 2-ton projectile aimed at Izuku's chest. Izuku didn't move. He didn't use blue to catch it. He just stood there. The car hit the space 3 inches in front of Izuku. Crunch. The front bumper crumpled as if it had hit a solid diamond wall. The car's momentum was absorbed instantly by the infinite series of fractions between it and Izuku. The vehicle hung in the air for a split second, defying gravity, before sliding harmlessly to the ground. Automatic selection, Izuku murmured, pulling a notebook from his pocket and scribbling a note. I've successfully programmed the 6 eyes to filter objects by mass and velocity. Anything traveling over 10 meters per second is automatically stopped by the infinity unless I consciously allow it. All Might stared at the crumpled car, then at the teenager. You automated your quirk? All Might asked, bewildered. Like a spam filter? Essentially, Izuku said, tapping his pen against his chin. I also filtered out harmful radiation, poisons, and liquids with a specific viscosity. Rain won't touch me anymore unless I want a shower. All Might shivered. It was impressive, yes. It was godlike. But there was something unnerving about it. Izuku was becoming less of a boy and more of a phenomenon. Young Midoriya, All Might said gently. How are you feeling? Emotionally? Izuku looked up. Behind the bandages, his expression was placid. Too placid. I feel efficient, Izuku said. That was what worried All Might the most. 10 months later, the morning of the exam, the entrance to UA High was a towering arch of glass and steel, a monument to heroism. Hundreds of students swarmed through the gates, buzzing with anxiety and excitement. Izuku walked through the crowd like a shark parting a school of fish. He wore the standard middle school uniform, but he had traded the medical bandages for a sleek, black blindfold made of a high-density synthetic weave. It looked more like a fashion statement than a medical necessity now. He wore it with a casual confidence that drew stares. He was chewing on a piece of caramel. Out of my way, Deku! Bakugo stomped past him, shoulders hunched. But even Bakugo didn't try to shove him anymore. Not since the incident with the sludge villain. Bakugo had kept his distance, watching Izuku with a mix of fury and suspicion. Good luck, Katsuki, Izuku said, his voice breezy. Don't tell me what to do! Bakugo snapped, storming ahead. Izuku chuckled softly. As he walked, he noticed a girl with brown bobbed hair trip over her own feet a few meters ahead. She was falling face first toward the pavement. Gravity began to claim her. Target identified, Izuku's mind processed. Mass, 48 kilograms. Velocity, falling. Threat, 0. Izuku didn't reach out his hand. He merely looked at her. Curse technique lapse. Blue, output 0.01%. He placed a tiny attractive point on the back of her blazer. The girl stopped falling. She hovered inches from the ground, as if an invisible hook had caught her. Slowly, she was pulled back to a standing position. Huh! The girl blinked, looking around wildly. I didn't fall? She turned and saw Izuku walking past her. He didn't stop. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He just kept walking, unwrapping another caramel. Wait! The girl called out. Did you do that with your quirk? You didn't even touch me. Izuku paused and turned slightly. It's bad luck to trip before the exam. Oh. Thank you. She blushed, rubbing the back of her neck. I'm Uraraka Ochako. I'm so nervous, I think I forgot how to walk properly. Midoriya Izuku, he replied. You should breathe. Your heart rate is 110. You're hyperventilating. What? Uraraka stared at him. How do you know my heart rate? I have good ears, Izuku lied. He turned back to the building. See you inside, Uraraka-san. He left her standing there, confused but intrigued. The written exam. It was a joke. The six eyes didn't just see energy. They processed information. When Izuku looked at a math problem, he didn't just see numbers. He saw the logic structure. He saw the solution as a path of least resistance in the chaos. He finished the 3-hour exam in 45 minutes. He spent the rest of the time balancing his pencil on the tip of his finger using micro-adjustments of gravity, annoying the proctor, ectoplasm, who couldn't figure out if he was cheating or just bored. The practical exam, Battle Center B. The bus ride to the battle center was quiet. Izuku sat in the back, his blindfold drawing the usual whispers. Is he blind? Maybe his quirk is sound-based? He looks skinny. He's gonna get crushed. Izuku ignored them. He was listening to the voice in his head. They are cattle, Sukuna sneered. Look at them. Shaking. Sweating. They reek of mediocrity. Kill them all and be done with it. No killing, Izuku projected the thought back. But, I admit, they are noisy. The vow brat, Sukuna reminded him. We are about to fight. You promised. I know, Izuku thought. Just, don't make me do anything too weird. The bus stopped. They stood before the massive gates of City B. President Mike was yelling from the top of a tower. Are you ready? Start. There was no countdown. The gates just opened. The other students hesitated. What? No countdown? Izuku didn't hesitate. He walked. He didn't run. He walked calm, measured steps into the city. What's he doing? A student with engines in his legs, Ida shouted. He's just walking. Go! President Mike screamed. There are no countdowns in real battles. That listener is already ahead of you. The mass of students panicked and charged, stampeding past Izuku. Izuku let them pass. He strolled down the main street, hands in his pockets. A three-pointer, a massive green robot, burst through a wall to his left. Target acquired. It raised a machine gun arm. Izuku stopped. He tilted his head. The binding vow activated. It was subtle. His posture didn't change, but the air around him did. The efficient feeling vanished, replaced by a cold, suffocating arrogance. A smile touched his lips, not Izuku's shy smile, but something sharper. Target acquired? Izuku repeated, his voice dropping an octave. You're a toaster, the robot fired. Bullets the size of soda cans rained down on him. They stopped. They hit the invisible barrier of infinity and hung in the air, spinning uselessly, before clattering to the ground like hail. The robot paused, its logic processors confused. My turn, Izuku said. He raised his right hand, pointing 2 fingers at the robot. Twist. He didn't use a chant. He just applied blue to 2 different points on the robot's torso, pulling them in opposite directions. Screech. The metal shrieked as the robot was violently torqued. Its upper chassis twisted 180 degrees while its legs stayed planted. Sparks flew, oil sprayed, and the robot crumpled into a heap of scrap metal. Izuku didn't even look at the explosion. He was already walking toward the next one. 3 points, he counted. The observation room. In a dark room filled with screens, the teachers of UA watched. This year's batch is spirited, Midnight commented, watching Bakugo blow up a robot. Lots of destructive power. Indeed, Cementos nodded. But there are a few outliers. Him, Aizawa Shota said, pointing to a screen. The one with the blindfold. On the screen, Izuku was walking down an alleyway. 3 one-pointer robots surrounded him. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He simply walked through them. As he passed, the robots seemed to collapse inward, crushed by an unseen pressure. Midoriya Izuku, Nisa squeaked, holding a file. Registered quirk, unknown mutation. High cognitive function. But this, he's not fighting, Aizawa observed, his eyes narrowing. He's cleaning up. He hasn't broken a sweat. His heart rate hasn't gone above 70. He's repelling physical attacks, Vlad King noted. And using some sort of telekinetic crushing force. It's versatile. It's terrifying, Aizawa corrected. Look at his body language. He's bored. He treats this exam like a chore. Let's see how he handles a real threat, Nisa said, his paw hovering over a big red button. Unleash the 0-pointer. City B, Main Plaza. Izuku had 60 points. He had stopped counting after a while. It was too easy. The robots were slow, predictable, and made of cheap alloy. Is this the best the hero world has to offer? Sukuna whispered, his voice blending with Izuku's own thoughts. Disappointing. Izuku stood in the middle of a 4-way intersection. Other students were panting, bruised, and exhausted. Uraraka was nearby, looking nauseous. Ito was checking his engines. Then, the ground jumped. It wasn't a vibration, it was an earthquake. The pavement cracked. Buildings swayed. From the end of the street, a shadow fell over them. A robot the size of a skyscraper rose up, blocking out the sun. The 0-pointer. It was colossal. Its treads crushed buildings like cardboard boxes. What is that? A student screamed. Run! It's the 0-pointer. There's no points for fighting it. The panic was instant. The mob of examinees turned and fled, screaming. It was a stampede of fear. Izuku stood still. He looked up at the behemoth. The 6 eyes analyzed it instantly. Mass, 4,000 tons. Composition, reinforced titanium. Weak point, neck joints. Boring, Sukuna yawned. Let's go home. Izuku turned to leave. There was no point in fighting it. Oh wow! A cry of pain cut through the noise. Izuku paused. The vow was active, suppressing his empathy, but the 6 eyes picked up the anomaly. He looked back. Uraraka was trapped. A piece of rubble had pinned her leg. She was in the direct path of the 0-pointer. The massive tread was descending, grinding the street to dust. She couldn't move. She looked up at the robot, terror in her eyes. Izuku looked at the fleeing students. Nobody was turning back. Even the one with the engines was running away. Let her die, Sukuna said. She is weak. Izuku looked at Uraraka. He remembered her kindness at the gate. He remembered All Might's words. You must become the strongest for the sake of peace. Shut up, parasite, Izuku muttered. He turned around. He didn't run. He bent his knees and engaged blue around his body to negate gravity. Boom! He launched himself into the air. He didn't fly like a bird. He tore through the sky like a missile. He ascended 50 meters in a second, hovering directly in front of the 0-pointer's face. The robot's sensors locked onto him. Threat detected. Izuku hovered in the air, his blindfold whipping in the wind. He felt light. He felt powerful. He felt transcendent. The valve pulsed. Sukuna's arrogance flooded his veins. Izuku didn't fight it this time. He embraced it. He let the feeling of being the honored one wash over him. He spread his arms wide. "Hey, big guy," Izuku shouted, a manic grin spreading across his face. "You're in my way." The robot swung a massive hand at him. Izuku raised one finger. Curse technique reversal. He poured positive energy into the negative energy of the limitless. Instead of attraction blue, he created the opposite. Absolute repulsion. A small, red orb of energy the size of a golf ball formed on the tip of his finger. It crackled with black lightning. The air around it screamed, unable to handle the physics violation. Red. He flicked the orb. It hit the center of the robot's faceplate. For a microsecond, there was silence. Then, the laws of physics snapped. Krakum. A column of pure repulsive force erupted. It wasn't an explosion, it was a rejection of matter. The 0-pointer didn't just break, its entire upper torso was blasted backward. The metal liquefied, shattered, and was launched into the stratosphere. The shockwave cleared the clouds above the city. The bottom half of the robot toppled backward, crashing into the buildings with a thunderous roar. Izuku floated in the center of the dust cloud, unscathed. He looked at his hand. Smoke was rising from his finger. "Oops," Izuku chuckled, the sound distorted and dual-layered. "Put a little too much juice in that one." Down below, the students had stopped running. They were staring up at the sky, mouths gaping. They hadn't just seen a student destroy a robot. They had seen a student rewrite the skyline. Gravity reasserted itself. Izuku began to fall. The adrenaline crashed. The vow receded. The headache returned with a vengeance. "Oh, crap," Izuku groaned, the arrogance vanishing, replaced by nausea. He realized he hadn't planned the landing. He plummeted toward the ground. He tried to activate Infinity to slow his descent, but his tank was empty. The red had drained his immediate reserves. "I'm gonna die," he thought blankly. Slap. A soft hand touched his cheek. He stopped falling just inches from the pavement. Uraraka, covered in dust and bleeding from her leg, was floating next to him. She had slapped him to make him weightless. "Release," she wheezed, putting her fingertips together. They both dropped to the ground. Uraraka immediately turned over and vomited rainbows. Izuku lay on his back, staring at the fake sky. His nose was bleeding. "That?" Izuku panted, wiping the blood from his lip. "That was exhausting." "Not bad, brat," Sukuna's voice echoed, sounding pleased. "Sloppy but loud. I give it a 6 out of 10. 1 minute left." Present Mike yelled. But it didn't matter. The exam was over. Nobody could follow that act. 1 week later, the Midoriya household was quiet. Inko was pacing in the kitchen. Izuku was sitting at the table, eating mochi. He was wearing sunglasses instead of the blindfold, resting his eyes. A letter lay on the table. "It's here," Inko whispered. "Izuku, open it." Izuku picked up the envelope. He could see through the paper with the 6 eyes. He already knew what was inside. But for his mother's sake, he tore it open. A holographic disc fell out. All Might appeared, projected in tiny blue light. "I am here!" As a projection, All Might! Inko shrieked. "Young Midoriya!" The hologram boomed. "You passed. With flying colors. In the written exam, you scored 100%. In the practical, well, the hologram cut to footage of the 0-pointer losing its head. You scored 60 villain points. That alone is enough to pass." But, the video changed. It showed Uraraka trying to negotiate with Present Mike to give Izuku some of her points. "There are other criteria. Rescue points. You risked your life, and the structural integrity of the city, to save a fellow examinee. For that act of bravery, and overwhelming firepower, we grant you 60 rescue points. 120 points? Inko gasped. "Izuku Midoriya," All Might's voice softened. "You have the potential to be the strongest. But remember, power without a heart is just violence. come to UA High. This is your hero academia. The hologram faded. Izuku stared at the empty space. He felt the weight of the promise he had made. He had tapped into Sukuna. He had used red. And he had enjoyed it. For a split second, looking down at that robot, he hadn't cared about saving anyone. He had just wanted to break something. He touched his chest, feeling the second heartbeat of the curse. I made it, Mom, Izuku said quietly. I'm so proud of you. Inko hugged him, crying fountains of tears. Izuku hugged her back, but his eyes remained open behind his sunglasses. Welcome to the playground, Sukuna whispered. UA High staff room. 120 points, Midnight whistled. Highest score since All Might. He destroyed the 0-pointer with a single attack, Vlad King said, shaking his head. The repair costs are going to be astronomical. Aizawa Shoda sat in his sleeping bag, staring at Izuku's file. The picture showed a boy with a gentle smile, but the combat data showed a monster. He's dangerous, Aizawa said. He saved the girl, All Might argued from the corner, though he looked small in a yellow suit. He enjoyed it, Aizawa countered. I watched his face, All Might. When he unleashed that attack, he was smiling. Not a hero's smile. A predator's smile. Niza sipped his tea. This makes him a high-risk student. If we don't teach him control, he could become a threat greater than any villain. The Six Eyes, a power that sees too much. I'll take him, Aizawa said, closing the file. Class 1A. If he steps out of line, if that thing inside him wakes up, I'll stop him. Can you? Midnight asked softly. Can you erase a mutation like that? Aizawa didn't answer. He just looked at the photo of the blindfolded boy. We'll see, Aizawa muttered. Welcome to hell, kid. The door to Class 1A was massive. To a normal student, it was an intimidating architectural choice designed to accommodate students with gigantification quirks. To Izuku Midoriya, it was a wall of noise. He stood before it, his hand hovering over the handle. Through the thick wooden metal, his 6 eyes picked up the thermal signatures of 19 other people. He could see the flow of their bioelectricity, the unique hum of their quirk factors. One signature was a roaring blast furnace of nitroglycerin-tinted anger. Katsuki. Another was a rigid clockwork engine of discipline. Ida. And one was a soft, bubbling nebula of zero-gravity potential. Uraraka. Izuku adjusted his black blindfold. It was a sleek, high-density fabric woven with carbon fibers, a gift from the support companies eager to study his condition. It blocked 99% of visible light, yet to him, the world was still a neon-drenched rave of information. They are loud, Sukuna's voice grumbled from the depths of Izuku's gut. The one with the engines vibrates. It's annoying. Tear his legs off. Be nice, Izuku thought back, projecting a mental image of a calm ocean to drown out the curse. We're here to learn. We're here to eat time until you die, Sukuna corrected. Izuku sighed and opened the door. The classroom went quiet as he entered. He knew what he looked like. A slender boy with unruly green hair, wearing the standard gray blazer, but with his eyes completely covered by a black bandage. He walked with that eerie, gliding gait, a byproduct of constantly manipulating the space around him to reduce friction. It's him. Ochako Uraraka jumped up from her seat near the front. The boy who punched the giant robot. He didn't punch it, Tenya Ida corrected, chopping the air with his hand. He repelled it. With extreme prejudice. Good morning. I am Ida Tenya from Semi-Private Academy. Ida marched over. Izuku didn't flinch. He just looked at Ida, or rather, faced him. Midoriya Izuku, he said softly. Midoriya-kun. Ida gestured to the blindfold. I must ask. Is that attire sanctioned? Does it not impede your learning? It keeps my brain from melting, Izuku said simply. He walked past Ida toward a desk in the back. As he passed the desk behind Bakugo, the blonde stiffened. Bakugo didn't turn around. He sat hunched over, staring at his desk, his shoulders radiating tension. The air around him smelled of burnt sugar. Izuku sat down. He could feel the eyes of the class on him. They were curious, wary. They sensed the anomaly in their midst. If you're here to make friends, pack up and leave. The voice came from the floor. Lying in a yellow sleeping bag like a monolithic caterpillar was a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the pre-quirk era. Aizawa Shota. Eraserhead. Izuku's head tilted. The 6 eyes scanned the teacher. Strange, Izuku noted. His quirk factor is located in his eyes, similar to mine. But it's subtractive. He cuts the connection between a person and their power. Aizawa unzipped the bag and stood up, looking disheveled. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. Time is limited. You kids are irrational. He pulled a gym uniform out of his bag. Put these on and meet me on the field. The P grounds. The sky was a piercing blue, empty of clouds. The students of Class 1A stood in a cluster, wearing their blue UA tracksuits. A quirk apprehension test? The class shouted in unison. What about the entrance ceremony? The guidance counselor meeting? Uraraka asked anxiously. If you want to be a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa deadpanned. His bloodshot eyes scanned the group. Yui runs on a freestyle logic. The teachers have full discretion, and I have discretion to judge your potential. He turned his gaze specifically toward Izuku. Bakugo, Aizawa called out. You finished first in the entrance exam, well, technically second in points, but first in combat score. How far could you throw a softball in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo stepped into the circle. He stretched his arms, a feral grin spreading across his face. He glanced back at Izuku for a split second. Boom! The explosion was massive. The ball rocketed into the sky, riding a shockwave of fire. 705.2 meters, Aizawa read from his device. The class gasped. Whoa! That looks fun! We can use our quirks as much as we want? Aizawa's expression darkened. Fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be fun and games? He smiled, a terrifying, jagged expression. Right. The one with the lowest score across all 8 events will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Huh? The panic was palpable. Izuku stood silently in the back, adjusting his collar. Expulsion. Izuku thought. Logically, it's a ruse. But his energy, he's serious. He has cut people before. He enjoys the pruning. Midoriya, Aizawa said suddenly. Izuku looked up. You're up next for the 50-meter dash. Event 1 50-meter dash. Izuku stood at the starting line next to Ida. Ida's engines revved. I will not go easy on you, Midoriya-kun. Even if you have a spatial quirk. Ready. The machine beeped. Start. Ida blasted forward. Recipro burst. He was a blur of blue and silver. Izuku didn't run. He leaned forward and let gravity do the work. Curse technique lapse, blue. He created a point of high gravity attraction in front of himself, a virtual singularity that pulled him forward. He wasn't running, he was falling horizontally. The space between the start and finish line compressed. He crossed the line. 3.04 seconds, the machine announced. Ida crossed a split second later. 3.05 seconds, Ida skidded to a halt, gasping. Incredible! You warped space to shorten the distance? I just pulled myself to the finish, Izuku said, dusting off his tracksuit. He felt a slight throb in his temple. Using blue for mundane tasks was efficient, but it was like using a flamethrower to light a candle. Aizawa watched him, scribbling on his clipboard. He relies on the attraction force. High speed, low physical exertion. But does he have stamina? Event 2, grip strength. Izuku held the dynamometer. He didn't use his muscles. He wrapped the device in a layer of cursed energy and crushed it inward. Crack. The metal crumpled into a ball. Error, the machine read. Mizo Shoji, who had gripped 540 kilograms, stared at the ruined device. Dude. Event 5, ball throw. This was the main event. Uraraka had just scored infinity, which put the class in high spirits. Midoriya, Aizawa called. Izuku stepped into the circle. He picked up the ball. It felt light. Aizawa was watching him like a hawk. His scarf was floating slightly, his hair beginning to rise. Here it comes, Izuku thought. The test. Izuku wound up his arm. He prepared to use red, the repulsive force, to launch the ball into orbit. He began to channel the positive cursed energy. Suddenly, the world felt different. The connection to the ambient energy didn't vanish, but something tried to sever it. A wave of erasure washed over him. Izuku looked at Aizawa. The teacher's hair was standing straight up. His eyes glowed red. He was using his quirk. Erasure, Aizawa muttered. It shuts off the quirk factor by halting the genetic expression. Izuku paused. He could still see the atoms in the air. The 6 eyes were still processing terabytes of data. The pool of cursed energy in his gut, Sukuna's energy, was still churning. Nothing had happened. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly. Why isn't it working? I'm looking right at him. Is his quirk heteromorphic? No, the manipulation of space is an emetotype. The eyes might be a mutation, but the telekinesis should stop. Izuku smiled. It was a small, sad smile. It won't work, sensei, Izuku said calmly. What? Aizawa gritted his teeth, straining his eyes. My eyes. Izuku tapped his blindfold. They aren't a quirk you can turn off. They are physical. It's like trying to erase Ojiro's tail. My brain is wired differently. And the telekinesis? Aizawa demanded. That's not a quirk either, Izuku lied, or told a half-truth. It's a consequence. A byproduct of the energy my body produces to survive the eyes. You can't erase a metabolic process. It was cursed energy. Aizawa's quirk erased quirk factors. It targeted the specific genetic evolution of humanity. But cursed energy was older. It was primal curses. It existed outside the genetic lottery of quirks. Aizawa was trying to delete a file format his computer couldn't read. Aizawa blinked. His hair fell down. The dry eye kicked in. TCH. Aizawa looked frustrated. So you're a biological anomaly. A walking glitch. Something like that. Izuku turned back to the field. Let's show them, Sukuna whispered. Don't use red. Too flashy. Use raw reinforcement. Throw it with your arm. No, Izuku decided. I'll use the laps. He held the ball. Blue. He didn't throw the ball. He amplified the limitless between the ball and his hand, and then created a vacuum tunnel in the sky. He flicked his wrist. The ball vanished. It broke the sound barrier instantly, crack, and shot upward, pulling a trail of clouds with it. It didn't arc. It just kept going, pulled by the artificial gravity well Izuku projected. It disappeared into the stratosphere. Aizawa looked at his device. 700 meters. 800. It's still going. He sighed. Infinity. Tie with Uraraka. The class erupted. He rivals Uraraka. He's a monster. Bakugo stood in the crowd, his hands trembling. Not from cold. From rage. He ignored me, Bakugo thought. He stood there, took the teacher's glare, and shrugged it off. Since when? Since when are you not a pebble, Deku? The result. Izuku placed first. Momo Yaoyorozu was second. Bakugo was third. By the way, Aizawa said, scrolling through the hologram. The expulsion was a logical ruse. Huh? The class screamed. To draw out your maximum potential, Aizawa said, turning away. Go change. Midoriya, come to the faculty office later. We need to discuss your biological anomaly. Izuku nodded. As the class dispersed, Bakugo walked up to Izuku. He grabbed Izuku's shoulder, or tried to. His hand stopped 3 inches from the fabric of Izuku's tracksuit. What do you want, Katsuki? Izuku asked, not turning around. You. Bakugo's voice was low, dangerous. You've been hiding this? All these years? You watched me run my mouth, watched me think I was the best, and you were laughing at me the whole time? Izuku turned. The blindfold faced Bakugo directly. I never laughed at you, Izuku said. I was too busy trying not to hear everything else. Don't give me that tragic crap. Bakugo yelled. You think you're better than me? Right now? Izuku tilted his head. Yes. I am. The silence on the field was deafening. Even Aizawa paused his walk back to the building. Bakugo's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. I'll kill you. You can try, Izuku said, walking away. But you can't touch me. The battle trial. The next day, the tension in Class 1A was thick enough to cut with a knife. I am here. All Might burst through the door in his Silver Age costume. Coming through the door like a normal person, the class cheered. The tension broke, mostly. Combat training, All Might announced. And to go with that, costumes, ground beta, locker rooms. Izuku stepped out of the changing booth. His costume was simple compared to the flashy armor of his classmates. It was heavily inspired by the Jujutsu sorcerer uniforms he had seen in Dr. Tsubasa's old texts, but modernized. He wore a high-collared, dark navy jacket that appeared black, with matching loose-fitting trousers tucked into sturdy combat boots. The jacket buttoned up the side, sleek and minimalist. The only splash of color was a teal belt and subtle teal lining on the inside of the collar, a homage to his mother's hair color and his own Deku identity. And, of course, the blindfold. This one was white today, stark against the dark uniform, made of a specialized weave that managed his heat regulation. He looked like a priest of some dark religion. Or an executioner. Whoa, Midoriya-chan! Ajitsuyu croaked. Your costume is really simple. It's practical, Izuku said, adjusting his gloves. I don't need armor. If I get hit, the armor won't save me anyway. Uraraka walked out in her pink zero-gravity suit. Deku-kun! You look so mysterious. Like a secret agent. You look great, Uraraka-san. Izuku smiled politely. All Might gathered them in front of the monitor room. The scenario. Villains are hiding a nuclear weapon. Heroes must secure it. 2-on-2 battles. All Might drew lots. Team A, Midoriya Uraraka. Heroes. Team D, Bakugo Ida. Villains. The air in the room froze. Bakugo looked at Izuku across the room. He slammed his gauntlet fists together. Boom. Fate, Bakugo sneered. Izuku sighed. Of course. The setup. Inside the building, Bakugo and Ida stood by the papier-mâché bomb. Bakugo-kun, Ida said, tapping his helmet. We should coordinate a defensive strategy. Midoriya's spatial manipulation is formidable, but he seems to rely on line of sight. If we barricade— Shut up, Bakugo growled. He was pacing. I'm going to crush him. But the mission is to win, Bakugo snapped. I'm going to blow that barrier of his to hell. Outside, Uraraka was looking at the building blueprints. So, Uraraka said nervously. Do we have a plan? Bakugo looks really scary. He is scary, Izuku admitted. He's a genius at combat. But he's angry. And anger makes you sloppy. Izuku turned to her. Uraraka-san, go for the weapon. I'll keep Katsuki busy. But, can you handle him alone? Izuku adjusted his white blindfold. Handle him? Izuku chuckled darkly. I'm the only one who can. The encounter. Izuku and Uraraka entered the building. It was quiet. The 6 eyes scanned the floors above. 3rd floor. Stationary. That's Ida. 2nd floor, moving fast. Coming down the stairs. Duck, Izuku said. Huh! Izuku grabbed Uraraka's collar and pulled her back. Boom! The wall next to them exploded. Bakugo burst through the smoke, his gauntlet aimed right at where Izuku had been standing. DKU! Bakugo didn't wait. He swung a right hook. Izuku stood still. The explosion hit the limitless. The fire bloomed around Izuku like water hitting an umbrella. The shockwave ruffled Izuku's hair, but the heat didn't touch him. Go, Uraraka! Izuku commanded. Uraraka scrambled past the stunned Bakugo. Right. Bakugo tried to turn and blast her, but Izuku stepped in his path. Eyes on me, Katsuki. Bakugo growled and unleashed a flurry of explosions. Bam. 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 Left, right, uppercut. Every hit was precise. Every hit was powerful enough to crack concrete, but they all stopped 1 inch from Izuku's skin. Bakugo was punching a ghost. Why won't you fight back? Bakugo screamed, blasting the floor to create a smokescreen, then swinging a leg kick aimed at Izuku's head. Izuku didn't block. The leg stopped. Because you aren't a threat yet, Izuku said. That broke something in Bakugo. Not a threat? Bakugo stepped back. He was breathing hard. You think you're untouchable? You think you're a god? He raised his right arm. He reached for the pin on his grenade gauntlet. All Might said not to use this, Bakugo whispered, his eyes wide with mania. But if you don't dodge, you'll die. In the observation room, All Might grabbed the microphone. Young Bakugo, stop. You'll kill him. He won't die if he dodges. Bakugo pulled the pin. The blast was immense. It filled the entire hallway. The heat was enough to melt the linoleum floor instantly. The wall of the building was blown out. Uraraka, 2 floors up, felt the building shake. Smoke filled the corridor. Bakugo stood there, panting, his arm aching from the recoil. Did I get him? Bakugo wheezed. The smoke began to clear. Standing in the center of the scorched hallway was a sphere of untouched floor. And in the center of that sphere stood Izuku. But something had changed. Izuku's uniform was singed at the edges. The barrier had held, but the sheer thermal intensity had almost overwhelmed his automatic filtering. He had felt the heat. Izuku reached up and pulled the white blindfold down. For the first time, Bakugo saw them. The 6 eyes. They were a brilliant, crystalline blue, glowing with an inner light that seemed to contain the sky itself. They were beautiful and terrifying. Izuku wasn't smiling anymore. His face was blank. Cold. He tried to kill me, Izuku thought. He tried to kill us, Sukuna whispered. Are you going to let a monkey throw fireworks at the king? Izuku took a deep breath. He lowered the mental wall. Just a little, Katsuki, Izuku said. His voice echoed, layered with a guttural growl. Is that it? Bakugo froze. The pressure in the hallway skyrocketed. It wasn't heat. It was fear. A primal, heavy dread that settled in his gut. You! Bakugo stammered. Izuku vanished. He used blue to compress the space between them to 0. He appeared instantly in front of Bakugo, nose to nose. Too slow. Izuku punched. He didn't use a quirk. He used cursed energy reinforcement. He wrapped his fist in black and red energy and drove it into Bakugo's gut. Wham! Bakugo's eyes bulged. He folded like a lawn chair. The air left his lungs in a wheeze. He flew backward, smashing through a concrete pillar. He hit the wall and slid down, coughing bile. Damn you! Bakugo struggled to stand up. He fired an explosion at the ground to propel himself forward. I'll kill you! He launched himself at Izuku, a human missile. Izuku watched him come. Time seemed to slow down. Grab his arm, Sukuna instructed. Break it. Izuku reached out. He caught Bakugo's wrist midair. The explosion detonated in Izuku's palm, but the infinity contained it. Izuku twisted. He slammed Bakugo into the floor. Hard. The concrete cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Gah! Bakugo screamed. Izuku didn't let go. He stood over Bakugo, holding him down by the face. You're weak, Kaken, Izuku whispered. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the arrogance of a god looking at an ant. You focus so much on the explosion, you forget the space it occupies. You're loud. You're messy. Bakugo stared up at him, paralyzed by the sheer overwhelming aura radiating from Izuku. The blue eyes were burning into his soul. Don't look at me, Izuku said. He flicked his finger against Bakugo's forehead. Cursed energy output minimal. A shockwave of force, like a heavy hammer, hit Bakugo's skull. Bakugo's eyes rolled back. He went limp. Izuku stood there for a moment, his hand hovering over his childhood friend. His heart was racing. It felt good. It felt intoxicating to dominate someone who had tormented him for years. Yes, Sukuna purred. That's it. Crush him. Hero team. Wins. All Might's voice rang out over the intercom. Uraraka had touched the weapon while Ida was distracted by the noise downstairs. The declaration snapped Izuku out of it. He blinked. The glow in his eyes faded. He stumbled back, looking at his hands. They were shaking. He looked at Bakugo, unconscious and bruised on the floor. Oh God, Izuku whispered, the cold arrogance vanishing, replaced by panic. Kaken? He knelt down, checking for a pulse. It was strong. Just a concussion. Izuku sat back on his heels, hyperventilating. He hurriedly pulled the blindfold back up over his eyes, hiding the 6 eyes, hiding the monster. The aftermath. Back in the monitoring room, the class was silent. They had watched the beatdown. It wasn't a hero capturing a villain. It was a predator dismantling prey. That was... Kirishima swallowed. Manly? But also kinda terrifying. He didn't just beat him, Tokoyami muttered. He broke his spirit. All Might looked at the screen, his face grave. He had seen the shift in Izuku's stance. He had seen the malice. Izuku walked into the room. He walked slowly. He didn't look at anyone. Midoriya, All Might said softly. I know, Izuku interrupted. His voice was hoarse. I went too far. You utilized excessive force in the takedown, Momo Yaoyorozu spoke up, her hand raised. While your defense was impeccable, the final blow was unnecessary. Bakugo was already neutralized. You struck him out of anger? Yes, Izuku admitted. He didn't make excuses. I was angry. He walked to the back of the room and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. He felt sick. Uraraka walked up to him. Deku-kun? Are you okay? I'm fine, Uraraka-san, he lied. You looked really scary back there, she said honest. But you also looked sad. Izuku paused. I'm not sad, he whispered. I'm just full of noise. Full of Sukuna's laughter echoing in the void of his mind. You enjoyed it, the king taunted. Don't lie to the girl. You liked the way his bones creaked. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut behind the blindfold. Shut up, he thought desperately. Just shut up. But as the class continued, Izuku knew one thing for sure. The line between being a hero and being a monster was thinner than he thought. And he was dancing right on the edge. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint, the USJ, was a study in social friction. Class 1A sat in the swaying vehicle, the hum of the electric engine vibrating through the floorboards. For most, it was a field trip. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a torture test of his sensory filters. He sat near the back, his legs crossed, hands resting loosely in his lap. He wore his hero costume, the high-collared, dark navy sorcerer's uniform that absorbed light, paired with the pristine white blindfold that covered the upper half of his face. To the casual observer, he looked like he was sleeping. In reality, he was counting the heartbeats of everyone on the bus. Kirishima, 72 BPM. Stable. Azui, 58 BPM. Amphibian physiology slows it down. Bakugo, 85 BPM. Always angry, always ready to detonate. Midoriya-chan? The voice cut through the data stream. Izuku tilted his head slightly to the left, acknowledging Tsuyu Azui. Yes, Azui-san? Call me Tsuyu, she croaked bluntly. I speak my mind. Your power, it's really similar to All Might's, isn't it? I mean, the way you send things flying. But All Might doesn't have that invisible wall, and he doesn't float. The bus went quiet. It was the question everyone had been dancing around since the battle trial. Izuku had dismantled Bakugo with a level of violence that was uncomfortable to watch. Izuku smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, mostly because they were covered, but the set of his jaw remained stiff. All Might is a physical powerhouse, Izuku said, his voice smooth and airy. He hits things hard. I just condense space to get out of my way. It's more like math than muscle. But that last move, Eijiro Kirishima piped up, leaning over his seat. The one where you knocked Bakugo out without touching him. That felt like, I don't know, sheer pressure. It was manly, but scary. Cursed energy, Izuku muttered under his breath, too low for them to hear. Louder, he said, intimidation is part of the job, right? Sure, Kirishima grinned, hardening his arm. But you're cryptic, man. A mystery wrapped in a blindfold. If only my personality was as flashy as yours or Bakugo's, Izuku deflected effortlessly. Bakugo, sitting near the front, didn't turn around. He was staring out the window, his jaw clenched so hard a vein throbbed in his neck. Since the defeat, he had been eerily quiet. He was processing a reality where Deku wasn't a pebble, but a mountain he couldn't climb. We're here, Aizawa's tired voice announced from the front. Quiet down. The USJ was a colossal dome, a testament to UA's budget. 13, the space hero, stood waiting for them like a welcoming astronaut. Welcome, everyone, to the unforeseen simulation joint. As 13 launched into a passionate speech about the fragility of quirks and the importance of rescue, Izuku felt a prickling at the base of his skull. It wasn't a headache. The binding vow Sukuna was holding, the cursed energy flowing from the dormant king was fueling Izuku's brain, keeping the 6 eyes from frying his neurons. This sensation was different. It was a disturbance in the ether. Izuku turned his head toward the central plaza of the facility, down the long staircase. The air there was twisting. Space is tearing, Izuku thought, his internal radar pinging wildly. Someone is forcing coordinates to overlap. Sensei, Izuku interrupted 13 mid-sentence. Aizawa frowned. Midoriya, don't interrupt. They're here, Izuku said. His voice dropped the polite student facade. It was cold, clinical. Who? Guess. Below them, in the center of the plaza, the air swirled into a vortex of purple mist. It expanded violently, tearing open a hole in reality. From the darkness, a hand reached out, pale, covered in severed hands. Then a face. Then a body. And then an army. Dozens of villains poured out of the warp gate, their intentions radiating off them like heat waves. Gather together and don't move. Aizawa shouted, snapping his goggles into place. 13. Protect the students. What's that? Kirishima asked, squinting. Is this part of the training? Don't move! Aizawa yelled again, his scarf floating as his hair stood on end. Those are real villains. The atmosphere shattered. The students froze in terror. Izuku stepped forward to the edge of the railing. The 6 eyes analyzed the portal. Long-range teleportation. A gatekeeper. The Misty One acts as the coordinate lock. The man with the hands, his soul is decaying. It feels like rot. Eraserhead and number 13, the misty figure, Kurojiri, spoke, his voice booming. According to the schedule we retrieved, All Might should be here. I knew it, Aizawa muttered. The press break-in was a distraction. Where is he? The man with the hands, Shigaraki, scratched his neck violently. We went through all this trouble to bring this crowd of extras, and the symbol of peace isn't here? Maybe he'll show up if we kill a few kids. The malice in the air thickened. Aizawa leaped into action, diving into the fray to erase quirks and fight dozens of villains at once. Sensei! Midoriya called out, but Aizawa was already gone. We have to evacuate! Ida shouted. Everyone, to the exit! The class turned to run, but the purple mist was faster. Kurojiri warped in front of the door, blocking their path. I am afraid I cannot allow that, Kurojiri said politely. We are the League of Villains. We have come to extinguish the light of All Might. Move! Bakugo and Kirishima launched themselves at the mist, explosions and hardened fists flying. Stop! You can't hit him! Izuku shouted, recognizing the nature of the warp. He has no solid form to hit, but it was too late. Kurojiri expanded, enveloping the students in a dome of darkness. Begone! The floor vanished. The flood zone. Izuku didn't scream as he fell. Gravity shifted. The air temperature dropped. The smell of ozone was replaced by the smell of salt and stagnancy. He hit the water. Splash. Or he would have, if he were anyone else. Izuku's boots hovered exactly 1 millimeter above the surface of the shipwreck zone's artificial lake. The infinity barrier recognized the liquid surface tension and treated it as a solid floor. He stood on the rippling water, completely dry. Midoriya-chan, a splash nearby. Tsuyu surfaced, holding Mineta, who was crying and clinging to her like a leech. They swam toward the ship in the center of the zone. Izuku walked, literally walked on the water, toward them, gliding effortlessly. Whoa! Mineta snot bubbled. How are you doing that? Jesus could walk on water, are you Jesus? Surface tension manipulation, Izuku lied. Get on the ship. He leaped from the water surface to the deck of the sinking vessel. Below them, in the dark water, shadows circled. Dozens of aquatic villains were waiting. We're surrounded, Tsuyu observed calmly. They're waiting for us to enter the water. They're smart, Izuku noted. They separated us based on knowing our quirks? No. They don't know mine. If they did, they wouldn't have put me here. Why? Mineta whimpered. Because, Izuku adjusted his blindfold, water is a conductor. And in a closed environment like this, he looked down at the villains. They're just fish in a barrel. Hey! Get down here so we can drown you, kiddies! A villain with a shark head yelled. Izuku walked to the edge of the railing. Binding vow, active. Emotional suppression, 40%. He felt the cold logic of Gojo Satoru, and the malice of Ryam and Sukuna bleeding together. Tsuyu-san, Izuku said. Cover Mineta's eyes. It might get messy. Ribbit? Izuku raised his hand, palm facing the water. You guys are annoying, Izuku said, his voice echoing slightly. He didn't use a complicated technique. He simply grabbed the space occupying the center of the lake with his cursed energy. Curse technique lapse, blue. He clenched his fist. The center of the lake imploded. It wasn't a whirlpool. A whirlpool takes time. This was a sudden, violent vacuum. The water, the villains, the debris, everything was yanked toward a single point in space with the force of a collapsing star. Crack. Bodies slammed into each other. Skulls met ship hulls. The villains screamed as the water pressure spiked and then vanished, dragging them into a tangled ball of limbs and unconscious bodies. The ship groaned, lurching toward the center, but Izuku held up his other hand and pushed the ship away with a small pulse of red, keeping it stable. In 3 seconds, the entire aquatic squad was incapacitated, floating in a groaning heap in the center of the zone. Mineta's jaw was on the deck. He flushed them. That was efficient, Tsuyu said, her eyes wide. Scary, but efficient. Izuku turned to them. He wasn't panting. He wasn't sweating. Stay here, he ordered. I'm going to the plaza. Wait, Midoriya! Tsuyu called out. Sensei is fighting there. It's dangerous. That's why I'm going. Izuku stepped off the railing. He didn't fall. He walked on the air, stepping on invisible platforms of force, heading toward the center of the dome. Boring, Sukuna yawned in his head. Fodder. Find me something with meat on its bones. Be patient, Izuku thought. The big one is waiting. The plaza. The battle was not going well. Aizawa was a whirlwind of capture tape and martial arts, but he was human. And he was tired. Shigaraki was counting the seconds between Aizawa's blinks. 23 seconds, Shigaraki scratched his neck. And 24. The villain dashed forward. Aizawa's hair fell. Shigaraki's hand reached out. Crack. Aizawa's elbow disintegrated. The skin and muscle turned to dust. Gah! Aizawa flinched, creating an opening. You're cool, Eraserhead, Shigaraki whispered. But you're not the final boss. Behind Shigaraki, the hulking monstrosity, the Nomu, stood motionless. Nomu, Shigaraki commanded. Break him. The creature moved faster than the eye could track. It appeared behind Aizawa, grabbed his head, and slammed him into the concrete. Crunch. Aizawa screamed, a sound that curdled the blood. The Nomu pinned him down, breaking his arm like a twig. You can erase quirks, Shigaraki gloated, standing over the broken teacher. But you can't erase pure physical power. This is the anti-symbol of peace. Bioengineered to kill all might. Let him go. The voice came from above. Shigaraki looked up. Izuku Midoriya floated 10 feet in the air, looking down at them. His hands were in his pockets. The white blindfold was stark against the gloom of the USJ. Oh? Shigaraki tilted his head. A student? A reinforcement? Nomu, kill him. The Nomu screeched and launched itself into the air. It had no flight quirk, but its leg strength was so immense it essentially turned itself into a surface-to-air missile. It swung a fist the size of a microwave at Izuku's head. Izuku didn't move. Boom! The punch connected. Or it tried to. The infinity barrier flared. The shockwave of the punch blew the clouds away from the ceiling lights. The air pressure shattered the glass of the dome. But Izuku hung there, suspended in the air, the Nomu's fist pressed against the invisible wall centimeters from his face. Strong, Izuku commented. He removed a hand from his pocket and placed it on the Nomu's chest. But stupid. Red. A point-blank repulsion blast. Bang. The Nomu was shot downward like a bullet. It crashed into the plaza, creating a crater 10 meters wide. Dust billowed out. Izuku lowered himself slowly, landing between Shigaraki and the crater. You! Shigaraki scratched his neck furiously. You're the glitch from the entrance exam. The one who cheated. I didn't cheat, Izuku said, walking toward Aizawa's broken body. I just play a different game. He knelt beside Aizawa. The teacher was conscious, but barely. His face was a mask of blood. Midoriya. Aizawa wheezed. Run, you can't fight it. Rest, sensei, Izuku said softly. I'll handle the trash. Trash? Shigaraki giggled. It was a dry, raspy sound. You think you can handle him? The smoke cleared. The Noma stood up. It wasn't hurt. The impact that had destroyed the zero-pointer had done nothing? No, not nothing. Its skin was regenerating. The shock absorption was mitigating the damage. Regeneration and shock absorption, the 6 eyes supplied. A bad matchup for Red. Pushing it won't kill it. Punching it won't kill it. Nomu, Shigaraki pointed a decaying finger at Izuku. Don't stop until he's paced. The creature roared, a sound devoid of humanity. It charged. This time, the speed was different. Fast, Izuku thought. The Noma didn't just punch. It barraged. Hundreds of punches in a second. Ora. Izuku stood his ground, the infinity barrier flashing like a strobe light as it blocked the assault. The ground beneath Izuku's feet disintegrated into powder from the sheer pressure being transferred through the air, but Izuku himself was untouched. However, he was being pushed back. The friction. The heat. The sheer kinetic energy was taxing his brain. Even with Sukuna's energy, the calculations required to block this level of intensity were skyrocketing. Warning, cursed energy output at 80%. Brain temperature rising. You can't block forever. Shigaraki laughed. Shock absorption means your counterattacks are useless. And eventually, your shield will break. Izuku gritted his teeth. He tried to use blue to twist the Noma's arm, but the creature's muscle density was so high that it resisted the spatial warp. It was like trying to bend a diamond with a spoon. He's right, Izuku realized. I can't punch it to death. I can't blast it away. I need to sever the muscle fibers. I need to cut it. But he had no knife. He had no sword. Inside the innate domain, on the throne of skulls, Sukuna opened all 4 eyes. Struggling brat? Izuku blocked a massive haymaker that actually made him slide back 2 feet. He's durable. Too durable. He's a meat bag, Sukuna scoffed. Soft. Malleable. You're trying to crush a sponge. You need to slice it. I don't have a cutting quirk, Izuku thought desperately as the Nomu grabbed his shoulders, trying to crush the barrier with grip strength. You have me, Sukuna whispered. The time seemed to stop. The Nomu's beak was inches from Izuku's face, separated by the thin layer of infinity. Saliva dripped onto the barrier. Aizawa was bleeding out behind him. The other students were watching from the shipwreck zone, terrified. Use it, Sukuna commanded. Picture the line. Picture the separation. My technique is yours if you have the guts to take it. Izuku felt it. A dark, sharp energy sitting at the bottom of his stomach. It wasn't the fluid blue of the limitless. It was jagged. It was a knife in the dark. Cleave. Midoriya! Azuri screamed from the water's edge. The Noma opened its mouth to bite. Izuku's eyes, hidden behind the blindfold, widened. The azure glow turned a sickly, violet hue for a fraction of a second. A mouth formed on Izuku's left cheek. A slit in the skin that opened with a jagged grin. Get out of the way, the mouth spoke. It wasn't Izuku's voice. Izuku raised his right hand. He formed a shape like a pistol, but with his index and middle fingers joined. He didn't think about saving the villain. He didn't think about capture. He thought about cutting. Dismantle. He swiped his hand diagonally across the air. Shing. There was no beam of light. There was no explosion. There was simply a sound of wet tearing. The Noma's right arm, the one gripping Izuku's shoulder, detached. It didn't fall off. It slid off. A clean, diagonal cut went from the creature's shoulder down to its ribcage. The arm fell to the ground with a wet thud. Blood sprayed like a geyser, coating the invisible barrier around Izuku, painting his silhouette in red. Shigaraki stopped scratching. What? The Noma shrieked, backing away. It looked at its stump. The regeneration factor kicked in, muscle fibers writhing like worms, trying to reconnect, but the wound was cauterized by cursed energy. It was healing, but slowly. Izuku stood there, his hands still raised. He was breathing heavily. That wasn't limitless. That was pure, unadulterated slaughter. You! Shigaraki took a step back. You cut him? How? Your quirk is shockwaves. You're a cheat. A cheater. Izuku wiped the blood from his barrier, a surreal gesture, as if wiping a window. I told you, Izuku said. The mouth on his cheek had vanished, but his voice was still dangerously low. I'm not playing your game. He stepped toward Shigaraki. Now. Who's next? The fear in Shigaraki's eyes was genuine. This wasn't a hero. This was something else. Kurojirai. Shigaraki yelled. Kill him. Warp him into a volcano. The mist expanded behind Izuku. Too slow, Izuku thought. The six eyes saw the fluctuation. He spun around, preparing a red to blast the mist apart. Boom! The entrance doors of the USJ exploded inward. I am here! The smoke cleared. All Might stood there. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't doing a pose. He looked absolutely furious. All Might. Shigaraki breathed, his attention shifting instantly. Finally. The boss. All Might looked at the scene. He saw the students safe in the distance. He saw Aizawa broken on the ground. And he saw Izuku Midoriya. Izuku stood covered in the Noma's blood on his shield, his hand poised like a blade, radiating an aura that felt less like hope and more like impending doom. For a second, All Might didn't know who the villain was. Young Midoriya! All Might shouted, flashing across the plaza in a blink. He grabbed Aizawa's unconscious body and moved him to safety, then stood between Izuku and the villains. Step back. All Might commanded. I will handle this. Izuku blinked. The violet tint in his aura faded, returning to blue. The influence of Sukuna receded, leaving him exhausted. All Might, Izuku exhaled, his knees shaking slightly. He absorbs shocks. You can't punch him. I heard. All Might said, eyeing the regenerating Noma. And I see you disarmed him. I had to, Izuku whispered defensively. We will discuss it later, All Might said firmly. Get Aizawa to the entrance. Now, Izuku hesitated. He wanted to help. He wanted to finish it. Let him fight, Sukuna whispered. Let's see the old man die. Go! All Might roared. Izuku gritted his teeth. He grabbed Aizawa gently with a field of blue to lift him without touching the broken bones. Don't die, Izuku said to the symbol of peace. He turned and floated away, carrying his teacher. Behind him, the clash of titans began. All Might versus Noma. Boom. 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 The shockwaves rattled Izuku's teeth as he flew toward the stairs. He didn't look back. He knew All Might would win. But he also knew something had changed in the plaza today. He looked at his hand, the hand that had cast this mantle. It felt natural. It felt right. And that terrified him more than any villain. The aftermath. The police arrived. The villains retreated, Shigaraki wounded by his own frustration, Kurojirai exhausted. The Noma blasted into the sky by All Might, who had simply overwhelmed the shock absorption by hitting it faster than it could heal, plus ultra style. Izuku sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over his shoulders. The blindfold was back in place. Detective Tsukachi was taking statements. Midoriya-kun, Tsukachi said gently. We found the Noma's arm. It was surgically removed. The cut was molecularly precise. Izuku gripped the blanket. He was going to kill Sensei, Izuku said monotonously. I know, Tsukachi sighed. It was self-defense. But your quirk registry says spatial manipulation. It doesn't mention cutting blades. I improvised, Izuku said. I manipulated the space into a thin line. It was a lie. A partial lie. Tsukachi's quirk, lie detector, registered it as true but incomplete. All right, the detective said. Rest up. You did good, kid. You saved them. Tsukachi walked away. Izuku sat alone. You liked it, Sukuna's voice was clear. The moment the flesh parted. The look on the handman's face. You liked being the executioner. Izuku pulled the blanket tighter. He watched All Might being loaded into a different ambulance, steaming and reverting to his skeleton form. The hero looked at Izuku. He gave a thumbs up, but Izuku couldn't return it. He looked at his reflection in the ambulance window. Beneath the bandages, he knew his eyes were tired. But on his cheek, he could feel the phantom sensation of a second mouth smiling. I am not you, Izuku whispered to the reflection. Not yet, Sukuna replied.